The axe struck once, clean and steady, while the cowboy sat on his horse and realized he might have been wrong about her. Snow stung his face as the wind howled across the open field, cattle pushing hard against the fence line, hooves slipping on frozen ground. Ahead of him, she rode straight into the storm, not slowing, not turning back. Her coat snapped in the wind, and when she called out, her voice cut through the noise like she'd done this 100 times before. Rhett tightened his grip on the reins, watching her disappear into the white, and for the first time, he didn't know if he was riding to stop her or to follow. Tell me, would you have turned back? The road out to the Mercer place ran narrow and pale through the high grass, worn by years of wagons that had stopped coming. Frost clung to the fence posts that morning, a thin white edge that caught the light before the sun had fully climbed over the ridge. Rhett Callahan rode slow, his horse picking its way over frozen ruts like it knew there was no hurry to be had out here anymore. Old Amos Mercer had been gone since spring. Folks in Silver Ridge said the place would sit empty until winter took what was left of it. That was how these things usually went. Rhett had told himself he was just keeping a promise. Amos had asked him once, years back, to keep an eye on things if anything ever happened. Rhett hadn't said much at the time, just nodded. Men out here didn't make speeches over simple things. He expected to find a locked door, maybe a window broken in by wind, maybe nothing at all. Instead, he saw smoke curling from the chimney. Rhett pulled his horse up at the edge of the yard. The gate hung crooked, one hinge pulled loose. A pile of pine rounds sat by the chopping block, untouched, stacked neat but waiting. And beside it stood a woman. She had her back to him at first. The coat she wore had once been fine, city-made, the cut of it too clean for this place. But it was worn now, the sleeve torn near the elbow, the hem dark with dirt that wouldn't come out. Her hair was pulled back tight, no fuss about it. She stood still, looking at the wood like it had said something she was considering. Rhett swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. "Miss Mercer?" he called. She turned then. Not quick, just enough to meet his eyes. "No," she said. "Hayes." Her voice carried steady across the yard, not loud, not uncertain. Rhett nodded once. "Rhett Callahan. I run cattle east of here. Knew your uncle. I read your name in his letters." That gave him pause, though he didn't show it. Amos had written plenty, he supposed, more than most men. Rhett hooked his reins over the post and stepped closer, the cold biting through his gloves. He took her in properly now. The coat, the boots, wrong kind for this ground. Hands bare, fingers already red from the air. He said it plain. "I'll not waste your time, Miss Hayes. This land isn't forgiving. It's taken better folks than you'd think." Her eyes didn't move from his. "You should sell," he went on. "Head back east before the snow sets in. I'll give you a fair price, enough to make the trip worth it." The wind shifted, dragging the smell of pine and cold dirt between them. For a moment she said nothing. Then she smiled. It wasn't sharp, wasn't wounded either. Just small, patient. Like she'd heard something like this before and decided it wasn't worth the trouble to argue. She stepped past him without a word and reached for the axe leaning against the block. Rhett frowned slightly, watching. She set a round upright, steadying it with one hand. The axe came up, not rushed, not hesitant. It came down clean. The wood split straight through, falling open with a sound that carried across the yard. She reset another piece, swung again. Same result. No wasted motion. Rhett shifted his weight, boots creaking against the frost-hardened ground. He crossed his arms without meaning to. "You'll wear yourself out doing it that way," he said. She didn't look up. My Uncle Amos taught me when I was 9, she said, the words coming between breaths. Said a person ought to know how to keep warm. The axe rose again, fell again. The third round split and rolled aside. The wood doesn't care where I came from, she added. That was all. No argument, no challenge in her voice. Just a fact laid down like the rest of it. Rhett opened his mouth, then closed it again. He had come with a speech in mind. Not long, but enough. Enough to do what he thought was right. Enough to send her back before the land could do what it always did. But standing there, watching her set another round in place, he found the words didn't fit the way they had a mile back down the road. She didn't look at him again. Didn't ask him to stay. Didn't ask him to leave. She just worked. The sound of the axe carried steady, cutting through the quiet in a way that settled into the space between them. Rhett let out a breath he hadn't noticed holding. Offer stands, he said finally, though it came out thinner than he intended. Before the weather turns. She nodded once, still not looking at him. I heard you, she said. That was the end of it. Rhett stood there another second, maybe 2, long enough to realize there wasn't anything more to say that wouldn't sound like something he didn't quite believe himself. He turned back to his horse, pulled himself into the saddle, and gathered the reins. As he rode out through the crooked gate, the sound of the axe followed him down the road. Clean, even, certain. By the time the Mercer place slipped out of sight behind the rise, Rhett found himself turning the morning over in his head. He had come sure of one thing, that she wouldn't last, and somewhere between the first split of pine and the third, that certainty had cracked, just enough to let something else in. He rode on, a little slower than before, not quite settled in the saddle, not quite sure why. The thought stayed with Rhett longer than it should have. It followed him past the ridge, down toward the low creek where his cattle grazed, and into the quiet rhythm of the day. He found himself missing a step he'd done 1,000 times before, tightening a cinch twice when once would have been enough. By the time he rode into Dry Creek Crossing that afternoon, the place had already begun talking. Harlan Pike stood behind his counter with his sleeves rolled up, counting out nails into a tin tray. He didn't look up right away. Heard you rode out to the Mercer place, Harlan said after a moment. Rhett took off his gloves slow, setting them beside a sack of flour. I did. Harlan gave a short grunt. And? Rhett shrugged. She's there. That's so. Harlan finally looked up, one brow lifting. How long you give her? There was a pause. Not long, but enough. Month, Harlan decided for himself. Maybe less when the wind turns. Mrs. Givens, who had come in for sugar and stayed longer than she needed, shook her head near the stove. Girl like that won't last the first real cold snap. Rhett said nothing, just picked up what he needed. Coffee, a coil of rope, a small sack of oats, paid in exact change. When he stepped back out into the light, the air had warmed some, but the edge of winter still sat in it. He stood there a second, looking down the road that led nowhere but west. He told himself he had no reason to ride that way again. He told himself that twice. 3 days later, he found himself on that same road. The gate at the Mercer place had been straightened. Not perfect, but better. The hinge held. Rhett slowed his horse without meaning to. The yard had changed too. The pile of wood was smaller. Not gone, but worked through. Neater. Split clean. He didn't see her at first. Then he heard the sound. Metal striking wood. Even. Steady. He rode a little closer. Lila Hayes stood by the block again. Sleeves rolled now despite the cold, strips of cloth tied around her palms. The coat was gone. In its place, an old work shirt too big at the shoulders, sleeves pushed back. She lifted the axe, brought it down, didn't miss. Rhett watched from the fence line, not calling out this time. A length of rope lay coiled near the barn. Fresh. Not something Amos had left behind. A bucket stood by the well, water sloshing near the rim, half frozen at the edges. She was working faster than before. Not harder. Just settled into it. Rhett turned his horse slightly, meaning to leave, but something caught his eye. The north fence. A stretch of it had been down the week before. Posts tilted, wire sagging. He remembered thinking he'd come fix it when he had the time. Now half of it stood upright again. Not perfect, but right. He rode over, leaning in from the saddle. The posts were packed firm, dirt tamped down in layers. Done careful, done proper. Rhett sat there longer than he meant to. "You planning on riding circles all morning?" Her voice carried over from the yard. He turned his head. She hadn't looked up from the wood, but she knew he was there. Rhett cleared his throat lightly. "Fence looks better." "It stands," she said. "That's enough for now." He nodded once, though she couldn't see it. There was a beat of silence. "You need anything?" he asked, the words coming out before he'd decided on them. She paused then, just for a breath. Then the axe came up again. "I've got what I need." Rhett sat a moment longer. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of fresh split pine across the yard. He tipped his hat, though she still hadn't looked at him, and turned his horse back toward the road. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A week passed. Then another. Each time he found a reason. The creek crossing needed checking. The ridge had wolves moving through. The old Mercer boundary lines might need walking. Each reason held just enough truth to let him saddle up without arguing with himself too much. And each time the place looked different. Better. One evening, near dusk, he came up slow and quiet, the sky turning that deep blue that came just before full dark. He heard it before he saw it. A low growl, then a sharp crack. Rhett's hand went to his rifle, instinct quick. He moved around the barn and saw her. Lila stood near the chicken run, rifle still raised, breath visible in the cooling air. A shape lay near the fence line, still now. A coyote. She lowered the rifle after a second, steady, not rushed. Walked forward, checking the wire where it had tried to dig under. Rhett watched from the shadow of the barn. She didn't look shaken. Didn't look proud either. Just finished. She set the rifle down against the post, bent to fix the loosened wire, fingers moving slower now in the dim light. Rhett leaned back against the wood, something tight in his chest, easing in a way he didn't quite like. He stepped out then, boots crunching on gravel. She turned this time, only a little. "Evening," he said. "Evening." He nodded toward the fence. "You handle that alone?" "I was here," she said. That was all. Rhett looked at the coyote, then back at her. The strips of cloth around her hands were darker now, worn through at the edges. "You'll need thicker gloves," he said after a moment. She gave that same small smile again. "I'll get some." Rhett shifted, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a pair, old but good leather, broken in. He held them out. She didn't take them right away, just looked at them, then at him. "I didn't ask." "No," he said. "You didn't." Another pause. Then she stepped forward and took them, fingers brushing the leather first, testing it. "Thank you," she said. Rhett nodded once. Didn't say anything more. He mounted up again, turning his horse toward the road. As he rode out, the yard fell quiet behind him. No axe this time. No gunshot. Just the soft sound of wind moving through dry grass. By the time he reached the bend, he realized something that sat heavier than it should have. He hadn't come to check on the place. He hadn't come for the fence, or the creek, or the ridge. He'd come to see if she was still there. And for the first time, the thought didn't sit right or wrong. It just stayed. The thought didn't pass through him like most things did. It settled, sat quiet. Followed him through the next few weeks in ways he didn't talk about. By late October, the mornings came sharper. Frost held longer in the shade, and the ground gave off that hollow sound under a horse's hooves that meant winter wasn't far off. Rhett rode the North Line one afternoon, checking posts before the first hard freeze. He could have turned back at the bend. His cattle were fine. The fence held. Instead, he kept going. The Mercer place came into view slow, like it always had. Only now it didn't look abandoned. There was a line of laundry strung between two posts, shirts and cloth moving stiff in the cold wind. A small stack of cut kindling sat under the porch roof, covered with a piece of canvas. Someone had taken the time. Rhett slowed as he came through the gate. The barn door stood open. Inside, he could hear the low shift of a milk cow, steady and calm. A bucket clinked softly. He stepped down and tied his horse without calling out. Lila stood near the stall, one shoulder against the wood beam, a tin pail set beneath her hand. The rhythm was even, quiet. She didn't rush it. Rhett leaned against the doorframe, watching. She finished, set the bucket aside, and only then looked up. "You make a habit of walking into other folks' barns?" she asked. "Only when the door's open." She wiped her hands on a cloth, the leather gloves he'd given her hanging from a nail nearby. "That fence along the ridge still holding?" she said. "Held through last wind." She nodded once, not impressed, just noting it. Rhett stepped inside, the smell of hay and warm animal cutting through the cold. "You're running this place alone." "So far." There was a pause. "You don't hire help?" he asked. "I don't spend what I don't have." Rhett let that sit. He glanced around. The tools were laid out careful, not new but kept. A hammer rested where it should, nails sorted in an old tobacco tin. "You'll need more hands come winter," he said. She met his eyes this time, held them a second longer than usual. "I'll need less mistakes." That was the end of that. They moved out to the yard together without saying it. The light had shifted, turning the hills a dull gold that didn't last long this time of year. She walked ahead of him, not checking if he followed. He did anyway. Near the porch, a section of roof had been patched. Not pretty, but tight. "You do that yourself?" he asked. "With a ladder that didn't want to stand still," she said. He almost smiled at that. They stood there for a moment, neither of them stepping closer to the other. "Town's been talking," he said. "They always do." "They think you'll leave." She picked up a piece of wood, turned it in her hands like she was measuring it. "I didn't come here to leave." The way she said it didn't ask for agreement. Rhett shifted his weight. The wind pressed against his back, carrying the smell of coming snow. That evening, he didn't ride off right away. She set a second plate without asking him to stay. Didn't look at him when she did it. He sat anyway. They ate in the quiet. The only sound, the scrape of fork against tin and the low crackle from the stove. The room was small, warm in a way that didn't push too hard. Halfway through, she set her fork down. "Why were you so sure I'd fail?" she asked. No edge in it. Just a question that had been waiting. Rhett looked at his plate for a long second. "I knew someone once," he said slowly. "Came out from the east. Thought she could make a life out here." He stopped there. The rest sat behind his teeth. Lila didn't lean forward. Didn't ask him to finish. "I'm not her," she said. Simple. He nodded once. "I can see that." They went back to eating after that. Nothing else needed saying. When he left, the sky had already gone dark. The stars came out sharp over the ridge, the kind that made the land feel bigger than it was. Rhett mounted up and took the road slow. Behind him, a light still burned in the Mercer house. It hadn't done that in a long time. The light in that window stayed with Rhett through the next stretch of days. It showed up in his mind at odd hours, while he checked the herd at dawn, while he sat alone with his coffee gone cold, while the wind rattled loose boards against his barn. Winter came early that year. The sky changed first. It went flat and gray, the kind of gray that didn't move. The air turned still in a way that never meant anything good. Rhett stood out by his fence line late one afternoon, watching the horizon. His horse shifted under him, uneasy. Then he saw it. A wall of white building fast over the ridge. He didn't think about his cattle first. He thought about her. Rhett turned his horse hard, already moving before the thought finished forming. The wind hit him halfway down the slope, sharp and rising, carrying snow that hadn't reached the ground yet. By the time he reached the Mercer place, the yard was empty. The door stood closed. No smoke, no sound. Rhett swung down and pushed it open. Cold air met him inside. No one there. He stepped back out, jaw tightening, eyes scanning the land. Tracks. Fresh. Leading west. Out toward the open field. He didn't hesitate again. The storm swallowed the world quick. The ridge disappeared. The fence line vanished under blowing snow. The wind came hard enough to steal the breath from his chest if he turned the wrong way. Rhett leaned low over the saddle, following what little he could see of the ground. Then he heard it. A voice. Faint. Carried in pieces between the gusts. He pushed forward. And then he saw her. Lila rode ahead, barely a shape against the white, moving along the edge of the herd. The cattle pressed tight, confused by the wind, drifting toward the far fence where the ground dipped. She circled wide, cutting them off, pushing them back, alone. Rhett felt something hit his chest, hard and sudden. Not fear, not exactly. He rode straight into it. "Left!" he shouted, though the wind tore the word apart. She turned at the sound, eyes finding him through the storm. No surprise there. No relief either. Just a quick nod, like he'd arrived when he should have. They worked without speaking after that. He took the outer edge, riding hard against the push of the wind, turning the cattle back when they tried to scatter. She moved through the middle, steady, guiding them forward toward the narrow cut between the rocks. Snow stung his face. His hands went numb on the reins. Time stretched. Or maybe it folded in on itself. All Rhett knew was the sound of hooves, the low panic of cattle, and the shape of her ahead of him, never slowing, never breaking line. At one point, a calf stumbled, dropping into the drift. Rhett moved to reach it. She was there first, off the horse, pulling, pushing, getting it back on its feet with a strength that came from somewhere deeper than muscle. She didn't look at him, didn't wait. Just kept moving. Something in him shifted then. Not cracked. Shifted. By the time they reached the cut, the wind had turned vicious. It screamed through the rocks, driving the snow sideways. They pushed the last of the herd through, closing them in where the walls broke the worst of it. Rhett leaned forward in the saddle, breathing hard. Lila rode up beside him, her face red from the cold, hair loose now where the wind had pulled it free. "You done?" she called. He nodded once. "Then let's get back before it buries the trail." They rode together this time. Not side by side. Not close, but not apart either. The ride back felt longer. The world had gone white. The sky and ground no longer separate. Only the pull of the horse beneath him and the shape of the house ahead kept Rhett moving in the right direction. When they reached it, neither of them spoke. They got down slow, legs stiff, hands shaking from the cold. Inside, Rhett moved to the stove without being asked. Wood. Fire. He worked it until the flame caught, then fed it steady. Behind him, he heard her setting water on to boil. The soft clink of tin. The quiet rhythm of someone who knew what to do. He sat back on his heels once the fire held. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The storm pressed against the walls, heavy and constant. Lila wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, hands still trembling slightly as she poured coffee into 2 cups. She set one near him without a word. Rhett took it. Their fingers didn't touch, but they came close enough that he felt the heat of her hand in the space between. He looked at her then. Really looked. The wind still howled outside. The world still tried to break anything that stood against it. But she hadn't broken. Not once. And for the first time since he'd seen her standing by that woodpile, Rhett didn't see a woman who didn't belong here. He saw someone the land hadn't taken, someone it had shaped, someone he hadn't understood. He held the cup a little tighter. The storm went on. Inside, the room stayed warm. The storm didn't let up. It pressed against the walls, steady and deep, like it meant to stay. Snow slid off the roof in soft thuds. The window glass rattled once in a while, then settled again. Rhett sat with his elbows on his knees, the coffee cooling in his hands. He hadn't taken a sip in a while. Across from him, Lila had gone still, not frozen, just quiet in that way she had when she was letting something settle before she spoke. The fire cracked low between them. Rhett let out a breath. "I need to tell you something," he said. She didn't look away, didn't nod, just stayed there, listening. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, eyes dropping to the floor for a moment. "Her name was Martha," he said. The word landed soft in the room. "She came out from back east, real town, brick streets, piano in the front room." A small pause. "Didn't belong to this kind of place. Not the way I thought she would." The fire shifted, sending a brief flare of light across the walls. "I brought her here anyway," he went on. "Figured she'd learn it. Same way I did. Same way everyone does." He shook his head once. "She didn't." Lila's hands tightened slightly around the edge of her blanket, just enough to show she was listening closer now. "She got quieter," Rhett said. "Not all at once, just less of her each month. Wind never stopped. Work never stopped. Winter came and stayed longer than it should have." He swallowed. "By the 3rd year, there wasn't much left of her to lose." He stared into the fire. "Fever took her," he said. "That's what folks said." Another pause. "I don't believe that." The storm filled the silence for a few seconds. Rhett finally looked up at Lila. "I saw you that first morning," he said. "That coat, those hands, and I thought I was looking at her all over again." His voice dropped. "I wasn't trying to run you off because I thought you were weak." He shook his head slightly. "I was trying to keep from watching it happen again." The words stayed in the air. Lila didn't speak right away. She stood up instead, slow, crossing to the stove to pour more coffee. The movement was steady, measured. She brought the cup back, set it near him, then sat again. "I'm sorry about Martha," she said. Simple. No weight added to it. No pity. Just truth. Rhett nodded once. Another stretch of quiet followed. Longer this time. Then she spoke again. "I didn't come here to be saved," she said. He didn't interrupt. "I didn't come here to prove anything to you or anyone else either." Her voice stayed even. "I came because I was tired of being somewhere that didn't belong to me." She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I needed something that was mine, even if it was hard. The wind hit the side of the house harder this time. The boards held. Rhett let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I see that now, he said. She tilted her head slightly. Do you? He met her eyes. Yes. The storm kept them there for 2 days. Snow buried the yard. The road disappeared. There was nowhere to go, and neither of them tried to make it otherwise. They talked some, not all the time, just when it came. She told him about Boston, not the way people usually did, not the fine parts, the small room, the way people spoke around her like she wasn't meant to stay long. He listened, didn't offer fixes, didn't fill the quiet. He told her more about the land, where the creek rose in spring, which ridge caught the worst wind, where to move cattle when the weather turned too fast. She listened the same way. On the second night, the storm began to ease. The wind dropped first, then the snow softened. They sat by the fire again, both of them quieter than before. Rhett shifted, resting his forearms on his knees. There's a fence between our places, he said. She glanced at him. Been there longer than I have, he added. She didn't answer. He let the silence stretch just a second more. 2 ranches, he said, 1 line between them. Now she watched him fully. We could take it down, he said. Run the land together. Keep it separate where it matters, but work it as one. He didn't rush the words, didn't dress them up. I'm not asking you to leave your place, he said, or to stand behind mine. The fire cracked once. I'm asking if you'd stand with me. The room held still around that. Lila looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned back slightly, the blanket slipping from one shoulder. My land stays mine, she said. It should. I don't answer to you. I wouldn't ask it. Another pause. If we do this, she said, we do it because it works, not because it's easier. Rhett nodded. That's the only reason I'd want it. She studied him a second longer. Then, just barely, she smiled. Then we take the fence down. Something in Rhett eased, not all at once, but enough. Spring came late, but it came. Snow melted off in long, slow days. The ground softened. Grass pushed through in patches that spread wider each week. The fence came down in sections. Not all in one day. Not all at once. Board by board, post by post. They worked opposite sides at first, then closer, then side by side. By the time the last section lay flat, there wasn't a clear line left to follow. One evening, months later, Rhett stood near the woodpile behind the house. The axe came down clean. Lila didn't look up. A young ranch hand stood nearby, shifting his weight. You want me to take over? The boy asked. Rhett leaned against the fence post, arms crossed. No, he said. The boy frowned slightly. Rhett watched her set another round, steady and sure. She's got it, he added. The axe fell again. Clean. Rhett let out a quiet breath. I told her once she didn't belong out here, he said. The boy glanced at him. Rhett's eyes stayed on her. She's been proving me wrong ever since, he said. Another split. Rhett shook his head once, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. Never been happier about that. Do you want to continue? Never been happier about that. And if you stand there a moment, really stand there, you can almost feel the wind coming off those hills, cold but clean, carrying the sound of an axe striking wood in a steady rhythm. You can picture the space between two people, once marked by doubt, now open ground. Imagine being in his place, carrying something you never set down, thinking you were protecting someone, when all along you were protecting yourself from the past. And then one day, you meet someone who doesn't need saving. Someone who stands their ground, quiet and certain, and shows you there's another way to live with what you've lost. Or maybe you see yourself in her. Walking into a place where no one expects you to last. Building something anyway. Not to prove them wrong, but to finally belong to your own life. Somewhere between that first piece of split wood and the last stretch of fence coming down, something changes. Not loud, not all at once. Just enough to let two people meet in the middle, without losing who they are. If this story stayed with you, I'd like to hear where you're watching from, and what part felt the most real. There are more stories like this waiting. Quiet ones, strong ones, the kind that settle in and stay a while. If you'd like to walk a little farther down this road with me, you're always welcome here.